Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we're getting into something really interesting. What happens when a very prominent, very sharp atheist voice starts looking at the historical case for Christianity and finds it plausible?
Plausible. That's the key word, isn't it?
It is. We're looking at a conversation between the podcaster Alex O'Connor and the adventurer Bear Grylls. And they sidestep the whole debate culture.
Right. It's not about winning points. It's more like a historical deep dive. They're asking, who is this person at the center of it all?
Exactly. It's a move away from that whole new atheism vibe, from hostility to history. And actually, before we jump right in, just a quick thing for me.
Go for it.
If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It honestly helps us a ton to keep making these deep dives for you. Okay, So let's set the stage, because this conversation, it represents a real shift. If you think back to the early 2000s, the atheist versus believer thing looked very, very different.
Oh, well, completely. I mean, back in, 2008, 2010?
Yeah.
We were in the peak of new atheism.
The Four Horsemen era.
That's it. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
The whole attitude was strident, aggressive.
It was aggressive. I remember those YouTube compilations, the Hitch Slap videos where Christopher Hitchens would just verbally tear someone apart.
It was a blood sport. You're right. The goal wasn't really understanding. The goal was to prove religion was a delusion.
A virus of the mind.
Exactly. And Alex O'Connor, he's really open about this. He says he was kind of swept up in that whole thing. He thought it was, cool to be the guy who could just destroy an argument.
But he's changed. He says it himself, I've grown up a bit. Now, we have to be super clear here for everyone listening. He hasn't converted.
No, not at all. And that's what makes this so interesting. He's still an agnostic. He's still a skeptic.
But he's moved from this is all silly to this history is way more complex and fascinating than I thought.
He calls the historical case far more interesting, intricate, and plausible than he ever gave it credit for.
And that word plausible for a skeptic. That's huge. So how does he even get there? He doesn't start with faith. He starts with the puzzle.
Yeah, almost like a detective story. He looks at the sociological evidence, and he asks a simple question. How did this happen?
Okay.
And he finds this historical anomaly that is actually really hard to explain away if you just think the whole thing was made up.
And it has to do with the specific culture at the time, right? First century Jewish culture.
Exactly. I think most people miss how utterly bizarre the rise of Christianity was in that context.
What do you mean?
Well, first century Judaism had one absolute unbreakable rule. You do not worship a human being. It was the ultimate taboo.
Yeah.
Idolatry, the worst sin imaginable.
So you don't just, decide one morning to start worshiping the guy down the street.
Not a chance. And yet, almost immediately after Jesus of Nazareth dies, you have thousands of Jewish people doing exactly that, worshiping him as divine.
And O'Connor's point is that something huge must have happened to cause that.
Right. You don't get a cultural shift that radical, one that breaks your deepest laws, without a massive catalyst. It's cause and effect. He's saying, look, I don't know if he rose from the dead, but something happened.
Something powerful enough to break that taboo.
That's the plausibility he's talking about. He's looking at the Gospels not as scripture, but like you'd study, Julius Caesar. He's just asking, what's the kernel of truth here?
This leads to probably my favorite concept from the whole conversation, this idea they call the Churchillian drift.
It is such a brilliant analogy. It's the perfect way to think about ancient texts. So, okay, think about Winston Churchill.
Right. Cigar, bulldog face, we shall fight on the beaches, that guy.
Exactly. A huge, distinct personality. And because he's so distinct, there's this thing that happens where quotes just get stuck to him.
Ah, yeah.
If you see some witty, grumpy, defiant quote online, everyone just assumes, oh, Churchill must have said that. It's Churchillian drift.
I have definitely liked memes with fake Churchill quotes.
We all have. But here's the insight O'Connor gets from this. Imagine every history book on Earth is destroyed, and the only thing we have left from that time is a book of these fake Churchill quotes.
So factually, the document is just wrong.
Totally inaccurate. But, and this is the whole point, would you still get an accurate picture of the kind of person Winston Churchill was?
Oh, I see where this is going. Yeah, you would. Even if the words are wrong, the voice is right. The character comes through.
The character survives the fabrication. And he applies this directly to the Gospels. He says, okay, maybe the timelines are a mess. Maybe some stories got exaggerated over the years.
Sure.
But the figure at the center of it, Jesus, he's too distinct, too consistent. His character is too sharp to be a total invention by a committee.
And the personality that emerges isn't the one we always see in pictures. O'Connor loves one specific trait.
The jousting.
Yes, the verbal jousting. He says Jesus seemed to love a good verbal challenge and intellectual trap. And he uses that famous render unto Caesar story.
It's the perfect example. You have to picture the scene. The religious leaders want him dead. So they corner him in public and ask this killer question. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar?
It's a total trap. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Absolutely. If he says yes, pay the tax, he's a Roman collaborator, the people will hate him. If he says no, don't pay the tax, the Roman guards right there arrest him for sedition.
Checkmate. They've got him.
They think they do, but he just asks for a coin. He holds it up and asks, whose face is on this? They say Caesar's. And then he drops the line, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's.
Brilliant. He completely sidesteps the trap.
And O'Connor's point is, that kind of mind, that sharp wit, feels real.
Yeah.
It's a signature. Whether it happened on a Tuesday or a Thursday, doesn't really matter. The character's there.
It makes him seem so much more human, like a real person. And that seems to be the bridge in this conversation, because both O'Connor and Bear Grylls seem to agree that the institution of Christianity can be a problem.
They really do. They both have this skepticism of the structure. And O'Connor brings up a statistic that just blew my mind. He says the period of the biggest growth for the church was between 33 AD and about 350 AD.
The first 3 centuries.
Right. But what did the church look like then?
Wow.
No cathedrals, no priests in robes, no sermons like we think of them, no choirs, and crucially, no Bible. The New Testament hadn't even been put together yet.
That is actually wild. The time it was spreading the fastest was when it had the least stuff.
Exactly. It was just the story. It was just about this figure. And O'Connor argues that all the stuff that came later, the labels like Christian, the complex rules, especially after the Council of Nicaea, it all feels man-made.
Then Bear Grylls, the Christian in the conversation, he agrees. He doesn't jump in to defend the institution. He seems to feel the same way, that the labels get in the way of the person.
It's like they're both trying to scrape the barnacles off the hull of a ship to see what's really underneath.
Which brings them to this great hypothetical they discuss, the time machine question.
I love this bit.
The question is simple. If you could go back to that time, what single moment would you witness? And their answers say everything.
They really do. Okay, so O'Connor the skeptic, he has 2 choices. His first one is all about forensic evidence.
He wants to go to the crucifixion.
Well, not to, pray. He wants to bring scientific instruments.
Right. The Gospels say the sky went dark. He wants to know, okay, was that a real astronomical event? He wants the data.
He's an empiricist.
Yeah.
But his second choice is so much more personal. He says he'd trade all that for just 5 minutes. 5 minutes walking with Jesus during his ministry.
This part really got me. He just wants to walk up and ask him, straight up, are you for real? Are you claiming to be God? Or did people just make that up about you later?
He wants to cut through all the noise and hear it from the source.
Okay, now compare that to Bear Grylls, the believer. Where does he want to go?
He picks the baptism.
In the river with John the Baptist. Right. Because for him, it's about validation. He wants to see the sky open, see the dove, and hear the voice of God say, this is my son. For him, that's the ultimate proof.
And this is where it gets so psychologically deep, O'Connor pushes back on that.
He asks this killer question.
He says, Bear, even if you saw that, would it actually stick?
It's such a good point, because we all think, oh, if I saw a miracle, I'd believe forever. But O'Connor says the human brain is a rationalization machine.
He says, you see the dove, you hear the voice, it's amazing. You go home, you wake up the next morning.
And your brain starts working on it. Was that really a voice, or was that just thunder?
And there were a lot of birds by the river. Maybe it was just a pigeon.
Maybe I was dehydrated.
Yeah.
Within 24 hours, O'Connor says, you would have explained it away. Sensory evidence is fragile. Our worldview just smooths it over.
So even if you got the proof you wanted, your own brain would delete it.
Which is the perfect lead-in to the character who really dominates the end of their talk. The one person who lived through this exact problem.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, who O'Connor calls his favorite person in the whole story.
Which is so funny. He's usually just the warm-up act for Jesus.
But historically, he was a huge deal. In fact, there's a Gnostic sect that still exists today called the Mandaeans.
I had never heard of them.
Most people haven't.
Yeah.
They revere John the Baptist as the true prophet, and they think Jesus was a false one.
Wow. So there was a real rivalry there.
A huge one. And that, for O'Connor, adds to the plausibility. If you're inventing a story, you don't include your main rival and make him look good. The fact that he's in the Gospels suggests the writers were dealing with real history they couldn't ignore.
But O'Connor's fascination isn't with his fame, it's with his doubt.
Yes. This is the most human moment. You have John, the guy who was there for the baptism. He saw the dove, he heard the voice, he had the proof.
The ultimate proof.
He did. But then, later in the story, he's locked up in Herod's prison, he's about to be executed, and he sends a message to Jesus.
And what's the message?
It's, are you the one, or should we be looking for someone else?
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. The guy who saw the miracles asking, did I get it all wrong?
It's devastating.
Eh.
But for O'Connor, it's also incredibly comforting.
How so?
Because it validates doubt. If John the Baptist, the guy who saw it all, could have doubts when he was suffering, then it's okay for us to have doubts 2,000 years later.
It gives you permission not to be certain. Doubt isn't a failure of faith. It's just a human response to pain.
Exactly. And Bear Grylls adds this great point. He says, we expect our religious leaders to be like Moses, you know?
The big Charlton Heston figure on the mountain with the booming voice.
Right, unshakable. But John was rough and wild. And Jesus wasn't some untouchable figure either.
Yeah.
They were real, gritty people dealing with real suffering and confusion.
So you go on this whole journey. You start with the aggression of New Atheism, and you end with this idea of historical plausibility, that these were fascinating, complicated, real human beings.
And that's just a much more interesting place to be. When you strip away all the labels and the buildings, you're left with a human story that even a skeptic like O'Connor can't easily dismiss.
So we've covered the Churchillian drift, we've talked about the trap of looking for proof, and the comfort of John the Baptist's doubt.
I think the big takeaway is that we can be curious without being defensive. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, there's this shared ground in just asking, what really happened here?
A move from hostility to history. And I want to leave you with one final thought, based on that time machine hypothetical from O'Connor. He said he'd trade all the proof in the world for just 5 minutes to walk with this person and understand who he was.
It's a powerful thought.
So here's the question for you to think about. If you had those 5 minutes to walk alongside a historical figure who changed the world, would you use that time to demand proof? Or would you use it just to try and understand their character?
A question worth pondering.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.